Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. In honor of the 150th birthday of the early 20th century American author Willa Cather, I'm reading a variety of biographies and literary criticism about her work, as well as buddy reading several of her novels. Today, I have the very special pleasure of sharing a wonderful conversation I had with the amazing Kim of Middle of the Bookmarch of Cather's novel, Oh Pioneers. I'll leave a link to Kim's channel down below in the show notes. Before we get started, I want to say that sometimes in Cather's books, she more or less lays out right in the beginning where things are going to stand at the end, and we follow her stories to see how that transformation happens. That is not true in O Pioneers. At the very start of the book, we see where things are heading, but some events are not necessarily foreseeable. And Kim and I don't want to spoil those developments for readers who might want to experience them fresh for themselves. I do think we're going to talk about those events, but we'll hold back on spoilers until the end of the conversation and let you know when the spoiler-free portion of the discussion is coming to a close. Let's go on to our conversation. Welcome, Kim. I'm so glad you could come today, and I'm looking forward to talking about Oh Pioneers with you by Willa Cather.
Thank you, Hannah. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad we got the chance to read this book together.
Oh, it was wonderful. Well, I wanted to just give a very brief summation of what's going on when the book starts, and then ask you a little bit about your reactions.
Sure.
So, the main character is Alexandra, and she's a Swedish immigrant to Nebraska, and she's strong and smart. Her father tells her that when he dies, that she will be in charge of the family's finances, taking care of the land. The family doesn't all feel totally comfortable with that all the time,
Right.
but he considers her wise and imaginative as well.
Right. Do you know the time period that this is set in? Because I was trying to get a good sense of that, and I wasn't really sure. And the whole time I was reading, especially Alexandra's character, I'm like, what is the year? When did this book start? Because the way Mr. Bergstrom treated her was unheard of with a daughter because he had three sons. So it would have been assumed that any land or property or financial resources would have been inherited by a son, even though she was the oldest. So I thought that was really interesting to start the story. And it was also pretty clear, even when she was 15 and Emil was 5, and she kind of, took care of him, and he's crying because the kitten got stuck up the pole. But you could tell she was independent and strong and kind of knew what she was doing. So it Cather set the tone immediately for Alexandra to be that very strong primary character.
I think the story takes place in the very end of the 19th century.
Yeah,
And
that
it's
makes
not
sense
written
to me.
until a bit later, but I'm pretty
Right.
sure that that would have been highly unusual for
Yes.
her to choose.
Definitely. But I was really impressed by Mr. Bergson because he could see his daughter's potential, and he could see her business sense and her strength. And he made a very wise decision because he also could see what was lacking in his older sons.
And it must have been hard for young men at the time to respond to that, given how unusual it was.
Right. And I think they were resentful about that. And even when everybody was much younger and they were working as farmhands basically. But I think you could read, especially when he's dying and he's informing everybody what his plans are. His two older sons were, reluctant to accept his dying wishes, but they knew they had to.
Right. I think it's very interesting, not only her role within the home, within her family, but her role as the female pioneer here. The pioneer is actually a pioneer by being
Right.
a woman, and that she's there's a critic. I actually wrote down the quote, and I'm trying to find it. Yeah, the story of a nation building in a female key, and so the story of her as an independent person, but also sort of as the face of the new America,
Right.
seems to be what Cather
Right.
is kind of drawing here.
I thought she was a visionary. And
Mhm.
I guess in a way that's what a pioneer has to be. And she saw the things that were going to work, even though nobody thought her ideas were any good. And her own brothers were looking at her like, you don't know what you're doing. You're gonna drive this land into the ground, so to speak. You're gonna fail. And she just, kind of patiently waited them out and did what she knew what was right anyway, and was a great success.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in addition to being strong, she is reserved in her
Hmm.
emotional state.
Right.
She has what's kind of a sweetheart in Carl.
Right.
What did you think of Carl? He's kind of an interesting pairing with her strength. He's a much more um, controlled and shy,
Yeah. I
artistic,
did. Yeah.
sensitive.
Yeah. Sensitive and shy. And to me, he appears as a helper, and he's almost part of the family because everybody's always together, but he was a helper. And it was pretty obvious early on in the book that he had feelings for her. But at that age, you've got so many insecurities, and he he was a boy, so of course he thought he had to make his way in the world before he could offer anything to a young woman. And I think you could kind of read between the lines in the very beginning of the book that that's where they were at.
Right.
And I thought he was sweet and reserved. Um, and they had that regard for each other. But as you said, Alexandra's quite reserved as well. And I think for me that um, not put me off of her in the very beginning, but I connect very emotionally to characters, and she's proper, but not in a prissy way. She is a woman of her time. She's patient. She's smart and wise at the same time, even very young. Um, but she doesn't reveal very much emotionally. She's not an open person. And I think in a way that's graceful of her, even though for me, I usually connect on a deeper emotional level to a character.
And I think we see some of that throughout the book for me.
Right.
There are a variety of moments where things happen and I expect one sort of emotional response, and
Yes.
it's not.
Yeah, it's true. It doesn't. Wait a minute. Why didn't she didn't feel that way? That didn't happen. Yeah.
So Carl, despite their um, close friendship, goes to the big city to try to start a new life, and
Right.
then later goes to Alaska. Um, and he knows that, as he says, that Alexandra belongs to the land, and
Right.
she, that Nebraska is her home,
Right.
and that it's not just Nebraska, the state; it's her land.
Yeah. She's
Um,
a part of. She's almost a part of the soil. It's physical for
yeah,
her, and she's not a person that could leave it, and she's not a person that could be pulled off of the land. It's not just an inheritance for her. I think it's part of her essence, and I think he smartly can see that. And that I think that's one of Cather's biggest strengths, is writing a type of a character who is that connected to the land and
yeah.
to the setting and the atmosphere. She does that so well in her books.
I'm not. a literary scholar by any means, but from what I was reading, that idea of a novel of the land, or having the land be the character, as people
Yeah,
often say, was relatively new in literature
right,
when Cather was doing it.
right.
That she
And
sort of
it's
started
interesting
off.
because she was not born in Nebraska. She's from Virginia, and her family moved to Nebraska when she was 9 years old. But the way she can write about the prairie and the plains and the west and the southwest, the Midwest of the country, you would think that she was born into it as well, but she wasn't. So I
Mhm.
found that pretty striking.
Well, let's go back for a second. What's been your experience with Cather so far? You've read more than this. Isn't your first Cather, is it?
No, I read The Lost Lady. I think that's the one, The Lost
Mhm.
Lady, and Death Comes to the Archbishop, which is 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 magnificent in Cather's use of setting as a character, and the she's writing about the Southwest and this priest, and it's not anything that's plot heavy, but it's so beautiful in the way she writes about the land and she writes about the desert and the people. Um, so I don't know if you've read that book, but
I still haven't.
oh,
Um,
I think that's one you have to pick up. I think you would love that one.
I read The Professor's House. I just finished
Yes,
it, and there's definitely some similarities I gather with the
right,
setting. But I'm looking forward to
right.
The Death Comes to the Archbishop.
Well, this book, Oh Pioneers, is her second novel.
Or her first, if you listen to her. She always
Yeah,
said it was her second first novel.
right, right. And I thought it's a pretty good second debut, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's what I thought about it.
I mean, she's clearly thought of it as her first because it was so different from
Right,
from her actual first. And
right.
she's really, this is her first novel about the West,
Yes,
the broadly speaking West, which,
right.
yeah. Well, so in addition to all of this strength of the land, of her connection with the land, and um, her support of the family, there are actually a lot of struggles and tension in this book. The
Yes.
tensions between the siblings that we've talked about, but
Yeah,
also, financial hardships.
yeah.
Are there things about that you found useful in understanding her experience?
I think this one of the strongest things about her is her resilience and tenacity. She's not tenacious in a stubborn, aggressive way. She's just knows herself, and she's going to stick with the project because she had an inner confidence that what she planned on was going to work, and it clearly did, because she was the one that achieved not just financial success, but a security with this inheritance, and it prospered because of her. But she never became arrogant with it, even though her older brothers, the two oldest brothers, were so condemning of her and so skeptical of what she was planning. And I think even at one point she was afraid that they would try to take it from her. And
Yeah.
she was the one that built it, and she built a legacy for the whole family. And I thought that was um, so resilient, but so forward thinking.
Hmm.
She
And
had
her
she had that insight.
confidence.
Exactly.
I don't know, I can't explain to you why this is the way it's going to be, but it is. She
Right.
was just sure of it.
Right. And I think that it confirmed it for me when we get later in the book, and she makes a comment about, or Cather had written a comment about, she chose to plant alfalfa. And everybody at the time thought she was crazy, but that's what brought them lasting wealth, is her choices of what to plant. Instead of planting corn, we're going to plant wheat and alfalfa, and the land prospered. But that you have to be very forward thinking and think of the big picture in order to make those decisions and stick with it.
Well, in addition to the hardships that she's able to overcome, the financial troubles in the area at various points, there are some symbolic tensions in the book. And I'm thinking specifically of the presence of wild ducks throughout.
Right,
And there's a disturbing scene in the earlier part of the book. Alexandra's younger brother has a crush on a Czech immigrant, and they go out hunting, and he shoots wild birds, but she is interested in hunting with him. But when she sees the dead bird, she's really upset.
right.
Because they've been having fun, is what she says essentially.
Yeah,
That they're having fun, and you made them stop having fun, and
right,
they've been wild and free, and that it's she's very hurt by that.
right,
And we see that recurring a lot in the book. One of the characters that I find most intriguing in this is Ivar. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name,
right,
um, but he is very upset about the killing of the birds. He thinks of them almost as sacred, and even when he sees the brothers standing out under the sky filled with birds, he says, "No guns, no guns." I mean,
right.
he's um, worried about this.
I'm not going to spoil anything, but the scene with Emil and Marie and the duck shooting, I think there's a lot of foreshadowing there.
Yes, indeed.
That's all I'm going to
Yes,
say.
yes, and let's get to that in a little while. Um, so Ivar is a really interesting character. He's an elderly man who has relatively unconventional ideas, personal ideas as well as religious ideas. He goes barefoot all the time. He has spells. It's unclear what the spells are,
Right,
but he's afraid he's going to be put into an asylum, and the brothers are afraid that he might hurt their sister.
right.
But he cares about Alexandra, and Alexandra
Mhm.
cares about him. There's actually a place where one character asks him why he goes barefoot,
Right,
where he says that from his youth he's had a strong, rebellious body, subject to every kind of temptation, but that he believes from his reading of the Bible that um, his feet are free, that feet in general are free members, and
right.
that he can let them go free. He can tromp around in the mud. He can do
Yeah,
anything in the filth when his desires are low. He can, um, and I think that fear of temptation gets
yeah.
important in the end of the book.
Right, I
And
agree.
this might be the time to talk about that plot line that
Right.
uh, some people might see as spoilers
Yeah,
in here. And Cather treats it in kind of a subtle way, and I really think that the point of that plot line is about the development of the major theme, but
mhm,
nevertheless, it's a for people who don't want spoilers, this might be a time to
right.
take a little break.
Yeah. Spoiler territory.
Yes. Um,
When you were talking about Ivar, when he was talking about his feet and trying to explain to somebody why he goes barefoot all the time, to him he says the Bible never says anything about feet when it comes to the parts of the body that can lead a person into temptation. It's that theme of temptation and all of his lecturing about temptation. And the spoiler part is, we meet Emil when he's 5 years old in the very beginning of the book, and we see him through Alexandra's eyes. We see him as this lovely little boy, typical little boy, but sweet and smart and sensitive. And I wasn't expecting to watch his growth arc. I wasn't expecting that I thought he was going to grow into being another farm boy and live on the land and with the rest of his siblings. I wasn't expecting that he was kind of the favorite of Alexandra and the baby of the family. So she wanted something different for him. And so she encouraged him to go away, go to college, see the world. And he does come back, but all of a sudden he comes back as a man, as a young man. And there's where we see his path down temptation when he starts to fall for Marie, who's married. And of course, she's a young, newly married, effervescent, gregarious young woman. And we see the mismatch between her and her husband, Frank. It's a clear mismatch in temperament, if not everything else. But then we see the connection between Emil and Marie, and the duck hunting and the shooting of the duck, and her being upset by that. But we see the connection throughout the middle of the book as it gets to the climax of we see separately the snippets of Frank's anger and his bitterness and some jealousy. And of course, Emil and Marie are sensing their growing attraction, love, or lust for each other. And Emil decides the way to escape this is I have to leave. I have to get out of here. And he goes to say goodbye, that one last goodbye. And he finds her on the edge of the orchard. And you're right when you say Cather treats this very respectfully, and she doesn't reveal too much, but it's very clear what she's telling the reader. She's very clear that they're lovers, or they would have been even in a deeper romantic emotional way, but she handles it so well and reservedly. And then, of course, Frank shoots them both as he's looking through the hedge. Do we believe that he knew what he was doing? Do we believe his reaction that he didn't realize he was killing his wife and he didn't want to kill this young boy, but he did, and he flees? And that was such a climactic moment. But it's wrapped up in that temptation and all the temptation that Ivar is speaking of, the temptation of the body and the temptation of the flesh. And what I thought was so striking is Alexandra's reaction after Emil dies.
Yeah. How did you react to that? And what she does is she goes to the prison and she visits Frank, the husband,
Right.
and she offers him her forgiveness.
Yeah. I was not
I,
expecting that.
yeah,
I mean, this is her baby. Emil was her baby. And she brought him up after their parents died. And I thought she would automatically be profoundly angry at Frank for what he did, and that in the moment decision. But she told him that she feels more for him than she does for Emil and Marie because they were in the wrong. They succumbed to the temptation. And I thought that was very striking because I would not have personally felt that way. And I could feel myself, wait a minute, what are you doing? This doesn't make any sense to me.
yeah,
And I just kept thinking she's a bigger woman than me because I don't think I would have reacted that way.
yeah. One of the critics that I was reading said that this moment of grace when she
Right.
gives the forgiveness. Do you think it is grace? Do you?
I do think it's grace in a way, but if we're looking at a religious symbolism for grace, grace is unmerited and we don't deserve it when we receive grace. But for her, she feels Frank deserves it, and she's
Right,
she's giving deserved grace, and she has mercy on him. And I can it was so strong to me, that sense of sincerity. Like she wasn't just doing it to make
right,
herself feel better. She truly believed that he deserved forgiveness.
yeah. Twice you've said that you were surprised that something happened. One is how Emil grew up,
Right.
but it's it's also really interesting to me that even in that first scene where he's 5 year old crying about his kitty,
Right.
he then goes into the drugstore and who does he meet but Marie as a little
Right.
girl, and she's totally flirting with him. So we
Yeah.
see it's all, and Carl is there too. And so, we're seeing the beginnings of exactly what plays out in
Right.
the novel.
Right. I know another little bit of foreshadowing, who would have known? Who
Right,
knew?
right. The flirtatious girls
Yes.
be the adulterous liaison later
I
on.
know. I don't think she could help it though, because of just her personality and her temperament. She was clearly that way even as a little girl. She was just full of life and extroverted and happy and joyful with these little things. And I don't think she could help it in a way.
Yeah, yeah. And she was the wild duck, right? I mean, she was
Right.
the free and having fun and
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So after that, Carl reappears and they decide to get married. And what Alexandra says is, I think when friends marry, they're safe. We don't suffer like these young ones.
Yeah.
These Their relationship is not the passionate relationship
Right.
that her younger brother had with Marie. It's this very loving but passionless. And I
I
think that word safe,
Yeah,
plays so much into
that hit
exactly
me.
the temptation you were talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that hit me the same way as well. I thought, would I have wanted a safe relationship? But
right.
then I
But
remind
maybe
myself,
especially after what happened.
right,
Although I think
right.
it was her personality as well.
Yeah. But I think, at her stage in life, her personality, um, there's a deeper love beyond passion and beyond, infatuation. And maybe she thought that she got to skip over all of that in favor of something deeper and more meaningful to her. That's not what all of us would choose. That's not what all of us think when we think of married love. But for her, I think safe is a good thing, even though, to us, to like the modern reader, safe is kind of like boring. So, but I don't think she saw any of that as boring. I think she saw that as this is what her life was meant to come to. And that gave her such a sense of peace and contentment.
So would you call it a happy ending
I
for
think I
her and
would.
the reader?
Yeah, I
For
think
that?
I would. And I especially liked Carl's reaction to her because he softly kissed her on the lips and he kissed her eyes and he was holding her hand. And to me, that's a happy ending. I wasn't expecting a grand finale. I wasn't, I was very happy that she didn't go off with him and go back with him. I thought, okay, that is so, I would have hated the book had she decided to leave and go with him. And I'm so glad she didn't. So to me, that was a happy ending. And quite honestly, the very last, I don't know how many sentences it is. The very last, I think it's one long sentence of the book is probably my favorite passage in the whole book. And I'm gonna read it. Um, she tells him, I've been very lonely, Carl, and she's leaning on his shoulder. And she says, I'm tired. And then it says, they went into the house together, leaving the divide behind them under the evening star. Fortunate country that is one day to receive hearts like Alexandra's into its bosom, to give them out again in the yellow wheat, in the rustling corn, in the shining eyes of youth. And I thought that it was so beautiful. And when it talks about hearts like Alexandra's, I think that was the one line in the entire book where I could read into her passion. She has an internal passion and she knows herself. I think that was the important thing. And I just love that last sentence of the book.
It is beautiful. Yeah. I think there are so many times where I would come across a phrase that I
Yeah,
didn't necessarily think meant a whole lot sometimes even,
right.
but which was just so lovely.
Right. I agree.
Very simple and plain and yet
Yep.
just stunning.
Yeah. Some of my favorite books are that way. Simple, plain, but beautiful language.
So was this a book that would make it onto your some of your favorite books list?
I'm giving this, I would probably give this like a 4.5. A 5-star book for me, I have a very deep emotional connection to. And I love the book. I thought it was beautifully written. Cather's way of writing setting and landscape is just gorgeous. But there was a little bit of emotional piece missing for me, but I do love the book, and I will definitely continue to read the trilogy. Um, and I've only heard great things about the next two books, and My Antonia, I think, is the one that she is lauded so much for, so highly praised for. So I'm really looking forward to that.
It's wonderful. And there are a lot of interesting parallels.
Right,
Um, yeah,
right.
yeah, it's my favorite.
Yeah. What did you
Antonia.
overall, what did you think about this one? You've been
I
asking me all the
loved it.
questions.
I loved it. And I had read it before and I liked it
Yeah,
more this time than I did the first time. But I didn't love it as much as my Antonia.
right. Okay, now that's making me even more eager to get to it.
Well, thank you so much for having this discussion with me today. This was,
Of course. I'm glad we were able to do it. Sounds
thank
good.
you. Fantastic.
Thank you.